Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk, sponsored by Darley and Inglis. My name's Bren O'Brien, and joining us is Tim Rowe. Today, we look forward to the Inglis Classic sale with Inglis's Sebastian Hutch. We talk about the foal registration issue, which is causing headaches for the bloodstock industry. In racing, syndication comes under the spotlight. Frankie Dettori bows out, and the ATC looks to boost its board. And in wagering, how Japan plans to keep out the black market sports betting companies. Tim, we look forward to the English Classic sale this week, as I mentioned. I mean, what have you learned from what we saw at Magic Millions and Karaka over the past couple of weeks that we can take into the sale this week?
Look, we've sort of discussed it in previous episodes of Straight Talk, but the book one at Karaka was really strong. The Australians were really strong at that. Buying, and obviously currency helped there, but I guess maybe the 100 years sort of, they had a lot of buyers there prepared to invest, and it's probably at the expense of the domestic market. But book two, which started very slowly, which I'm told always starts slowly, and you thought this is a bloodbath, and it picked right up. Book two at Karaka, domestic buyers kicked in, and then they had the summer sale on the Thursday, which, was obviously a lower sort of standard of horse, but the domestic buyers were all there, different buying bench, and you still had the John Foots and that look at every horse and Paul Moroney's. So I thought that was a successful sale as well. Some might say, oh, the averages or the medians or whatever, but you still, especially for New Zealand, they only get one chance to put these horses in front of people. They have to, so to get them sold is, some would lose money, but to get them off the property and get them sold, and you work on to the next crop of, their weanlings now and things like that, or, some, there's traders that'll come back at the 2-year-old sales as well, active at those book twos and book threes. And I thought that was important heading into, there's no question about the top end that is really quite strong. It's just that middle to lower end of the market, how strong that's going to be, and that'll be evident at Classic, and be interesting to ask Sebastian Hutch about that as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we'll talk to Sebastian about it, but just wanted to sort of touch on your thing. Like I said, the top end of the market strong, New Zealand market a bit different. This is probably a real good temperature test for where the sort of heart and soul, the trainers and syndicators type market is sitting at, Tim. And I think that's probably a really important pulse of Australian racing, where so much of the buying and so much of the racing is done at that middle level.
Yeah, sure. And, as in New Zealand, as John Foote told me, is that, if you want those horses that'll get a little bit of ground, you can win a lot of money, for a horse that can get a mile and things like that, and Oaks and Derbies, you don't have to take on the, European horses. If you can get one that can save it a distance, you can make a lot of money and have a hell of a lot of fun.
And joining us now is Sebastian Hutch, Inglis Bloodstock CEO. Sebastian, thanks for your time. I'll just pose the question to Tim. Sebastian, but what have you gleaned out of the sort of sales season so far that you can sort of take into Classic in terms of, where things sit and where the market's at the moment?
Thanks for having me join. Always fun to join. We have a very protracted build up to this sale. We started looking at yearlings for sale the end of July last year. Finalised the catalogue in November. We sit through Magic Millions, we sit through New Zealand. We've seen a lot of yearlings go through the sale ring already before we get our chance to have our first yearling go through on Sunday. I suppose it feels like it's been a solid start to the year. I mean, I was at Magic Millions for each day, book one. It felt like a good sale, not without its challenges, but it felt like a good sale. Clearance through the ring was better than what it was last year. They catalogued fewer horses. Turnover was down 5 million. It's a third consecutive year the turnover is down at that sale, but it felt like a good sale. I was in New Zealand for a couple of days of the sale. It felt like a good sale. Again, their catalogue numbers were down, and to some extent, the results for both Magic Millions and NZB are not dissimilar to Easter last year, where we catalogued fewer yearlings, but turnover held steady. So it'll be interesting to see, with a catalogue of 800 yearlings, how we go here. We want to try and clear well. We cleared well of the sale last year with good buyer engagement in the sale, and it's set the tone for what was a very good yearling sale season for us last year. I feel like we've prepared at least as well or better. Conditions don't feel in any way significantly different to last year. So, I kind of sit here apprehensively looking forward to the sale, not quite knowing what's in front of us.
Sebastian, the Classic sales, like, it's a reputation, I guess, built on diversity, and we go back to Extreme Choice was out of that sale. I think Hellbent and the first time Invincibles, people were able to buy them, well, in hindsight, for great value. This year's catalogue has 113 size, represented 74 different vendors. Do you sort of see that as similar as past years with that diversity and range of choice for the buyers?
They might see your line of questioning as evidence that our marketing is working well. We're promoting a diverse catalog with a whole different range of vendors and stores involved in the sale. Look, this sale, I think more than any other sale, certainly more than any other sale that we run, engages a hugely broad cross section of people. There'll be people who participate in this sale that haven't been participant in any sale up to this point, and I think it's as much to do with just the price point. We sold at this sale last year 241 yearlings for $50,000 or less. I think there were another 68 that could have been bought for $50,000 or less. Trainers, traders, agents, syndicators, people looking for a good colt, and more good colts coming out of this sale. People looking for a nice fee, people looking for something that can stay, something that can go early. We typically try and present as diverse an offering as we possibly can at this sale, and we feel like it's worked well in the past, and certainly we feel that this catalog is very consistent with those intentions.
I mean, sort of honing in on that one. I mean, the feedback you're getting from potential buyers. I mean, that middle market is such a crucial part. The trade and syndicators hot market, as you spoke about, such a crucial part of the Australian industry. I mean, there are challenges in every aspect of the industry in terms of the way businesses are structured and margins and profitability and all those types of things. But in your conversations with those people, Sebastian, are you confident that their appetite is there to continue to access that market and power a sale like this?
Yeah, I mean, people play their cards close to their chest. I mean, there aren't too many people who declare what their intentions are very specifically in advance of any sale, as in how much money they want to spend or how many earrings they want to buy. I think people come here with an idea or go to any sale with an idea in their head of what they'd like to do, and then subject to how they feel the market or how they see the horses, temper those decisions accordingly. We've had people on the ground since Monday. Inspections have felt good. Conversations we've had with people over the last number of months, and we're speaking to buyers all year round, but it typically tends to ramp up from when we release the catalog. Those conversations indicate that there's a good appetite to go and buy yearlings. We're conscious that there is a finite, or what we perceive to be anyway, a finite pool of money domestically from which vendors can fish for buyers. To that end, we've worked hard to try and cultivate as many international buyers as we can over an extended period of time. That program accelerated last year with the addition of Nikki Wong to our team. It brought an increased level of international engagement to sales like Classic and then subsequent sales like Premier and Easter. Nikki's had a full 12 months under his belt at Inglis now, or a little more than 12 months, has been through a sales cycle for us. He's very much synonymous with the business now. So I'm hoping that, or my expectation is that will add a bit more to the sale. We'll have Korean buyers at a sale like Classic for the first time, certainly in my time here. Chinese participation might be a little more subdued given the proximity to Chinese New Year, but Hong Kong engagement feels good. Malaysian engagement won't be at the level of what it was 12 months ago. Some of those buyers are choosing to go to Premier this year, but there'll still be Malaysian engagement. There'll be excellent engagement. Trainers and traders in New Zealand. I think there'll be a good level of international participation, which will be important in helping support turnover at the sale.
How do you juggle that, Sebastian? Quite a lot of those international buyers probably aren't going to come out to Classic, Premier and Easter. How do you sort of work out which sales for some of those international buyers and which sale you encourage them to attend?
Tim, people love a trip, so we encourage them to attend all three. And you're forgetting HTB a couple of weeks after Easter. So we encourage them to attend as many sales as we can. People's work, life schedules, training schedules, there are a whole variety of factors in what dictate what sales people can attend. We just try and present the best catalogs that we can. And people's preferences will vary from year to year. If a particular buyer's had good luck at a particular sale, there's an inclination to want to frequent that sale again. People might be chasing the progeny of particular stallions that might be particularly well represented at one sale or another. We have no bias. I mean, we're in a very fortunate position that we hold sales in Sydney and Melbourne. and in international context, 2 more desirable places to visit you could not wish to find. So it's not a hard sell to international clients, and similarly, it's not a hard sell to domestic clients who have to travel interstate. So we set out with the same objective for every sale, to present as big a buying bench as we possibly can to vendors, and we'll get our first test of how people are feeling about that probably on Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning, when people give us our assessment of how their inspections have been. And then ultimately the real test will be Tuesday evening when the sale is finished.
I better get on the phone to my Malaysian contacts and say there's business class flights available to get there this weekend. So that's
We're always, we're always open to these sort of conversations, Tim.
Not for the first time, Sebastian. Not only have you answered the question we asked you, but the six questions we had ready to ask you ahead of this. But I'll move forward to this one now. It's something I kind of ask it at every sale, but I think it's an important thing for people to know. I mean, you're sitting there, I'm sure, shoot forward Tuesday night, work out, have a look at your numbers, sort through your things. What are you looking at? What numbers are you looking at in terms of the key, determination of your success and Inglis's success throughout the sale?
Well, we want to hit a reasonable gross figure, and we want to clear well. I mean, sales companies get paid on gross. So I know vendors like to talk about different figures like average and median, and they really mean very little to us. We get paid on turnover. So every auction house is looking to try and generate as much turnover as they can. You can spin your commentary whatever way you like, but auction houses want to turn over money. And certainly nobody wants to be turning over less money than what they turned over the year before. And ultimately, the turnover is a reflection of the level of money that you facilitated into the market, and ultimately how much risk you've taken as an auction house. And we've taken a huge amount of risk for an extended period of time. Each and every year, we keep driving in, trying to drive turnover higher. Like the company in its second best year in terms of turnover for a calendar year last year in difficult circumstances. I think it's indicative of how hard our team is working across every sale. There's tremendous competition across the 2 auction houses for market share. Inglis, I'm proud to say, has established a big cut of the market share in 2025, and we want to grow that in 2026. We feel like we've got good momentum. Graduates of the sale are going well. We feel like we work with vendors to put together good catalogs for Classic, Premier, and Easter. We want to use that momentum into the wheeling sales and mare sales, and ultimately come out at the end of 2026 having done better than what we did in 2025. And I can say, like without wanting to sound too optimistic or too bullish or anything like that, but we want to try and do better than what we did last year across every sale, and that's the objective at this stage anyway.
Sebastian, thank you so much for your time and all the best for the sale.
Bren, Tim, entertaining as ever. Thank you very much. Thanks to you both.
And Tim, let's talk about the other major bloodstock issue of the week. A story you wrote yesterday about the embargoes being placed on yearlings and challenges with around, I guess, paperwork and foal registration and sort of a variety of other things. I mean, these issues are significant ones in the industry and causing a little bit of, there's a bit of a disconcerting feel about this, given Racing Australia has been much more strict in its enforcement of its foal declarations.
Yeah, so for a bit of background, I think the rules have been around for sort of 5 years, but they haven't really enforced them till, I think they told breeders sort of July 2024 and didn't probably act on it. And now, they threatened sort of mid last year, we reported that they would be cracking right down, which they've done. So there was a handful of yearlings at Magic Millions that hadn't been registered within the 30 or by the 60 days, which means an embargo is placed on them not to race by Racing Australia, and that's evident on the Australian stud book. Then the breeder has to go to an appeal process and pay $500 to get that heard by an independent, barrister that Racing Australia uses to hear that appeal why you were late and try and get that cleared. And Magic Millions were successful, or the breeders were successful in getting some of those yearlings, the bans removed and embargoes lifted. But there were still 2 at Magic Millions, a Savabeel filly and a Spirited Boom filly, that were sold. And obviously the market was told that was the case, that there's an embargo on these horses, and they were sold. And it's still ongoing at the moment. I think there's a bit of a backlog. There's 2 at Classic they'll be sold next week. That I know Sebastian Hutch is hopeful that Racing Australia or the appeals process will be heard before then have that lifted. Time will tell. I'd say, one of the criticisms, I spoke to a lot of people for that story, not all of them quoted, but was the lack of communication, and Christmas period has a bit to do with that, which Paul Erickson acknowledged, the CEO of Racing Australia. Yeah, so and there's one at Easter, I believe, as well. Just having those appeal processes heard, you know, it's a little bit ironic that, breeders have 30 or 60 days or 30 days to lodge their mere return and file ownership declarations, yet Racing Australia was meant to be 21 days, I believe, taking up to 80 days to hear these appeals. But that's, these are the rules. The breeders, the current 2025 born files, how many are out there that haven't been registered within the deadlines? I'm not sure. Paul Erickson says it's not that many. Maybe it's, potentially 100 we might have heard, Bren, but hopefully there's genuine excuses for that. Breeders should have known that these are their obligations these days. There are exceptional circumstances, but it's just unfortunate there's been a few yearlings caught up in this sort of crackdown, I guess.
Yeah, and also there's a 12-month sort of grace period before they get to the yearling stage, so you can sort of go through that process. But we don't want horses going through yearling sales with asterisks next to them, do we? So it's not a great look for the industry. And I mean, I guess you can understand from Racing Australia's point of view where they say, "Oh, it's Christmas time," but you can't have people across that period. But I mean, from my perspective, it's a bloodstock industry that has its most significant sale in terms of turnover in the first week of January. So, where are we at with this stuff? So I think as an industry, there must be sort of greater understanding and greater connection. And it probably speaks to some of the other challenges. The following segment is brought to you by Darley. Darley sires are well represented at Inglis Classic sale. First season sensation Animo, fresh of a host of big results at the Gold Coast and New Zealand, has 7 in the catalogue. There are 12 bivouacs, 5 by Gayat, 3 by Kermadec, 16 by Pinatubo, 3 by Street Boss, and at 10 by 2 Darn Hot. By Darley at Classic. Moving now to the racing space, Tim, and there's a piece we had earlier on this week, and I think it's one we might follow up about, I guess, possibly a few changes in the syndication landscape and what might be going on in Australia. Obviously, syndication of ownership is a really important part of the Australian industry and something the envy of the world. We look at our participation levels in terms of, then I think one in every just over 200 people own a share in a horse. It sort of came off the back of a couple of bodies, Stable Connect, and I think Kaplan, I think they're called Educational, coming together to form a course to help people sort of understand, I guess, the legal frameworks and variety of other compliance stuff around syndication. And, you and I talk to a lot of syndicators, and we know how much, I guess, paperwork and involved, because it is actually a managed investment technically. What is interesting out of that is I think that with ASIC looking to review the way that syndication works in Australia from this year, that it wouldn't surprise me to see a change the way things are done. And it's possible that we could see trainers having to go through the same level of compliance and I guess paperwork as what syndicators do. That will have implications across not only the training industry but the bloodstock industry as well. Tim, you'd anticipate?
It is onerous on the syndicators, the amount of paperwork. They can't officially start selling until they get a PDS approved by the respective PRAs. Can take weeks. So they're at a sort of in some ways, a competitive disadvantage compared to the trainer who just gets their owners to, I'm committing, and they send them an invoice or whatever straight away. And these are, at the moment, it'd be interesting if ASIC changes the rules, but at the moment, that's for advertised shares. I think syndicators that have got pre-commitments from, long-term clients, they don't need to advertise it. Therefore, they can sort of circumvent those PDSs, I think. But the ramifications would be huge if all trainers have to go down that route to syndicate a horse. Just again, it'll be onerous, the amount of administration required. The big stables, just because of their scale, will probably have a greater competitive advantage than the smaller one that's, trainers trying to do his own paperwork and manage that as well. It'll be just interesting to see what lobbying gets done to, put all sides across if ASIC go down that path.
Yeah, just to sort of give us some context here, ASIC are reviewing the instrument by which horse racing sits under managed investment this year, and there's a sort of bunch of discussions going on at the moment. We'll look to seek to reach out to a few trainers and the ATA in the next week or so, just to sort of see where their position sits at, and probably have a story coming up on that, which will explain a bit more in detail. We're not saying it's going to happen, but it is a possibility that it could happen. And I think that, what you're talking about, Tim, is quite interesting, because it's something we've spoken about a bit, both on the straight and on straight talk over the journey, is the difficulty of smaller trainers and how scale gives you such a great advantage in this game. And this will just be another example of where that's the case. I think the ASIC's concern around this, and what is interesting, ASIC actually delegates its effectively regulated control to the PRAs, to Racing Victoria, Racing New South Wales, Racing Queensland, all these bodies to actually organise these things and work through these things. But what is interesting from that perspective is just, the way that this is seen, and that the difference between what's called a managed investment and how that works. And I mean, it's technical, but it's important. And I think that there is some concern, certainly within a regulated landscape, that there's a weakness here in the industry, that there's a degree at which there's a risk to the consumer that if they buy a share in a horse, how guaranteed they are that that investment will carry forward, and what that looks like, and beneficial ownership, and all those sort of complex things that sort of feed into that. We'll look to dig into it a bit more. But it would be, I'm not saying it's going to be an earthquake go through the training ranks, but it would certainly cause some challenges given the amount of trainers that buy at our sales. I mean, more and more so, we're seeing, the bigger stables partner up with syndicators anyway, but a lot of these big stables take these horses on board and then seek forward to market them from them. And in that situation, Tim, if they were to market them, and if ASIC were to view that as the way they view syndicators, then it would actually be seen as a managed investment, and that may change things. I understand there's legal advice within the racing industry, which sort of sits against this and says, "Oh no, trainers are different because of A, B, C, and D," and they may choose to do that. But I mean, to be fair, Tim, the last thing we need in this industry is another protracted legal fight to determine what we can and can't do.
You got that right.
Moving on to things on the track, we saw Frankie Dettori bow out this week. A bit of a tribute to Frankie. It was an extraordinary career. No global jockey has made the mark he has, certainly in my lifetime. Just going back through his career, seeing he started riding in 1986, and almost a 40-year-long career, topped off with a Grade 1 win in Brazil. Frankie had his ups and downs. He had his challenges. He had suspensions. He's had bankruptcy. He's had all sorts of challenges. But through it all, he's been an absolute showman. And if you put the value and so on in terms of how they've promoted racing globally, there's probably few that have done it over such a long time as what Frankie Dettori have done, Tim.
I think it just shows the fact that owners kept bringing him out to try and win the Melbourne Cup, despite some opinions suggesting it was probably average rides. They kept bringing him because, just his appeal and his attraction. And as you said, he's had lots of ups and downs, some brought on by himself, others, the plane crash and just different, but he keeps bouncing back and, getting the job done. And to ride a Group 1 winner on Sunday in Brazil just to top it all off, went forward. And just that horse was never going to get beaten. I just happened to turn Sky on and they said, "Oh, Frankie Dettori's last ride coming up." Yeah, quite remarkable career what he's been able to achieve. And if he goes into promoting the gambling space now, Stake or Easy Go or however they're marketing it, it'll be interesting. I'm sure. Well, he's a well-known name, so a lot of racing fans will recognise him. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, even more so after the recent Netflix series and all that type of stuff, but he is just a global face of racing. And there's very few people that last that long in the space. We talk about it in Australia, we talk about the big names in Australia with Gay Waterhouse, going back to Bart Cummings, those type of people, the people that endure through racing. We've Damien Oliver retired a couple of years ago. Tim, and I know that Ollie now does a lot of work with Ladbrokes and bits and pieces, but Oliver's profile was massive, and he had ups and downs in his career as well. Like the nature of being in this game for such a long time is that you can't afford you won't have the peaks, but you can have the valleys as well. But it's well worth celebrating what has been an extraordinary career. As I said, sometimes some people may view Frankie's contribution in different ways, but you can't doubt his impact in terms of the profile of the sport. Just a final one, Tim, a story you covered off earlier in the week. I think it was probably last week, actually, about the ATC looking to boost the numbers on its board. Other publications have also put a story out this morning about plans possibly to develop some land at Randwick, which is Crown land, but would be granted back to the club in order to commercialise, to help them out to build about 3,000 apartments or whatever else it looks like. We'll get across that one and cover that one more in detail, but It's a very interesting time for the ATC because they're caught between this legal action with Racing New South Wales. They're being put into administration, which we'll hear later this month. There's a lot on the table here, and you got a feeling that we're going to be talking about those three little letters ATC for a lot of 2026.
Definitely, and, just with there's a member-elected board position available because of Ben Ben Bayo stepping down in September, citing sort of financial concerns about the club, and obviously the independent director, Natalie Houston, also stepped down. That's a separate issue. There's two independent director positions available on the board, which Racing Minister David Harris is slowly getting to, I think. But member elected is important because they've got four members of the board. If they lose one, and there is pressure over Tim Hale's suggestions, whether I'm not saying he's done anything wrong, certainly not, but there's that whole Mark Latham battle, I guess. I mean, if they lost, one had to resign for whatever reason, they would not make quorum, which would be quite probably devastating for their administration, fight against administration. So having another member elected director would sort of help their cause there, and that certainly in that, and just another, brain, I guess, on the board to help guide the direction in what is a pivotal time for the club.
Yeah, and it's a highly political fight at the moment. And there's an argument to say that whatever apartments they might build on Randwick might pay for the QCs or KCs they're going to have to need to in this upcoming fight in the Supreme Court in New South Wales. But that case, I think, on the 19th and 20th of February, Tim will watch it very closely to see what that looks like, which will be a challenge to Racing New South Wales's legal ability to put them into administration. That could have significant knock-on effects across the board. Like, that'll be a big case and a case we'll cover very closely here. But yeah, I mean, it's a mess of politics at the moment. And with every development of this story, we sort of see more and more. And as we mentioned before about the building apartments on Randwick, well, we've got a stalled project at Canterbury because it's stuck in legal challenges at the moment. We've got the Rose Hill stuff, which they've had to refresh after the vote. And they're obviously doing developments around Rose Hill. We don't know exactly what that looks like because they've had to revisit old plans and work through new plans. Steve McMahon said that on Straight Talk a couple of months ago that's going to take a little bit of time to walk through. So there's a lot on the ATC's agenda, let alone trying to get through the fact that, their board may not be actually, have control of the actual club beyond, February 20th, depending on what, the judge says then. So there's a lot to go on, a lot to play out in this. We'll move on briefly now to the wagering space. There's an article going up today in the Straight I'll let you have a look at. Japanese sports betting industry, which kind of sends a bit of an oxymoron given the challenges that you only really bet on 4 sports in Japan. But what was really interesting to me is looking at the illegal market or black market in Japan, and they estimate the value of that to be worth 6.45 trillion yen, which is about the equivalent of about $60 billion. To give that context, $60 billion Australian. To give that some context, Tim, that's actually more than the Japanese turnover on horse racing every year. I think it's spent about 4.5 trillion yen on horse racing. So the black market for sports betting. Now, you might think that, oh, well, look, similar to Australia, look, open up a regulated local market, it'll take money away from the black market. Well, the Japanese lawmakers have no appetite for that. They say sports betting has no, it's basically no, I'm trying to think the right way to express it. It doesn't fit with Japanese culture. And they're worried about integrity around, it's sort of similar stuff around referees and players and all that type of stuff. Enormous amounts of money bet on baseball overseas and through other platforms and also on Japanese soccer as well. Why this is significant from an Australian point of view, Tim, is a couple of things. Obviously, we're in a global network. Secondly, we've got a Japanese investor, Mixi, who have come into Australia to purchase a significant amount of 66% of PointsBet in order to operate like that. What is interesting from my perspective is what happens going forward. We're looking in Australia to go, okay, well, what's going to happen in our market now? We've got a fairly mature market. We've got a couple of players that might be subject or possible subjects of acquisitions. We've got a few that are keen to buy, BetR being amongst them, but there's a few others. There's rumours about where things are. I want to sort of flag the possibility that given the Japanese challenge, or what I've spoken about, the challenge in Japan of actually, monetizing sports betting or whatever else, some of these Japanese companies may look overseas. And if you look at the results to Mixi's bottom line, or to Mixi's revenue at least, from the PointsBet acquisition, they'll be looking at that very closely and seeing the advantage of actually buying into the Australian market. So maybe the next buy into the Australian market might be from a place we don't necessarily expect. Have a read today of that article. The newsletter today will also deal with that and probably contrast it or not contrast it, but certainly compare it to what happened in the Australian bloodstock market last year when we had Mitsu Nakashita turn up and buy a $3.2 million home affairs filly sort of out of nowhere last year. We talk a lot about the global markets and where things sit, but Japan's a place where there's a lot of corporate culture, a lot of desire to find growth and find opportunity. But I wouldn't say that we're surprised to see them more involved in that. There's plenty going on in the Australian wagering landscape at the moment. Have a look at thestraight.com.au and work through that. Tim, anything else on your agenda for the week? What else are we going to be looking at?
Well, apart from stories, there's Albury races this afternoon, Bren, so I'll have a look at that. And yeah, probably the ATC, obviously classic. So there's always something bubbling along in this game. Every time you think got a slow day, chance to do something else, something major happens. So that's the exciting part about the industry.
Yep, plenty to talk about. We've got Hobart Cup week this weekend. I know you've got a runner on Sunday. Best of luck there and in the Strut Stakes. And yeah, no, it is a time of year where the industry really does start getting motivated again. Okay, thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by our fabulous sponsors, Darley and Inglis. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to our podcast and be sure to subscribe. Send us an email at editor@thestraight.com.au. Sign up for thestraight.com.au. Give us your support. We've got a few articles there that are now only available to subscribers. Thanks for your time, and we'll talk to you again next week.